this is now when we get into an interesting area, because talking from international standards, I think now we know what to do. When it's about like a politician or a public party leader coming to an audience and speaking, but when it comes to online media, it's a completely different situation. And in 2011, international human rights experts came to this agreement. It's a joint statement that says that telecommunication and broadcasting rules cannot be just transferred to the internet because it needs very specific regulations. And so we can't just bring them in because it has the specificities. And I can talk about it later, but in terms of transparency, in terms of implementing your terms of services when it comes to, for example, Facebook, we know what the terms of service entails, but we don't know how it is implemented in practice because we don't see it in the transparency reports, for example. Then there is a problem with the certain guarantees that come in the normal life with court procedures. You can appeal, you have witnesses, you can prove. Now, if it comes to social media, how do you deal with it? How do you prove? How do you challenge it? If it was unlawfully removed with a delete button, how can you put it back? So I think I finish here because definitely we will have more details, but just to say that I think we got to an understanding when it comes to offline, but when it comes to online, I think we have a lot of struggles.
And Facebook has been, in fact, on the forefront of these battles. I mean, the possible interference in even elections, but also like the daily bread, so to speak, of like seeing that people do obviously are not able to transfer a code of conduct they would be having in daily life to their online behavior. So how this is a broad array and a scope of many things, electoral like influence and everyday like lunacy. So what do you make out of it, and how? I mean, obviously, yeah, we all know it, and like Facebook has not had its best year, and so yeah, just give us your thoughts on it.
Yes, first of all, let me thank you for inviting me to this very important discussion. Yeah, how are we dealing with this? First of all, let me explain what our mission is or what our aims are. We want people to be able to communicate freely on our platform, but we also want them to feel safe. Now, there's a balance that comes to it. How do we define what's allowed on our platform and what isn't? Well, we have long had community standards. There's a team that sits in 9 places all around the globe that writes these standards. There are many diverse backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, every continent, every religion, male, female. There are lawyers, there are psychologists, there are terrorism experts in this team. And the team consults with experts all around the globe every week. And we are trying to adapt our standards to the realities that people live in around the globe. And we are trying to write the standards in a way that they would reflect the values, that those values are enshrined in most of the legal systems all around the world. Now, of course, that's not an easy task that we are living with. And those standards are transparent. You can all read them online. We also publish the guidelines that our teams use when they work with the standards. And last year, we have also started to publish transparency reports twice a year. We have published the last transparency report just last week. And in that report, you can read what did we take down, so what are the action rates on the various standards, what is the rate from what we took down, what did we find proactively, and what did people flag us. And we also last year introduced an appeals process because we know that we are making mistakes. Of course, people are making these decisions, and there are many mistakes because we are looking at millions and millions of content. So now we also publish the numbers of appeals and the number of the content that we put back, that we reinstalled after an appeal. So now just to give you a little quick overview of what we're dealing with in terms of numbers. In Q1 2019 only, we took down 4 million pieces of content for hate speech. We took down more than 2 billion fake accounts. And when it comes to terror propaganda, we took down 6.4 million pieces of content alone from January to March 2019. Now, when it comes to the proactive rate, what are we finding proactively through our AI technology that is getting better and better? When it comes to hate speech, we found 65% of what we took down in the end by ourselves with the help of our technology. And it's very important to say that this doesn't mean that those 65% of what we took down were deleted automatically by a technology. No, that's not the case. When it comes to hate speech, it depends very largely on language, on cultural sensitivities, on context. So the AI classifier detects the hate speech and sends them to a human reviewer. So a human person is looking at the hate speech case and is making that decision.
And also, like, to be in all fairness, it's the same issue that Twitter faces, and also like that's very alien to Germans because WhatsApp is not as used as much here for political like conversations, but in other countries it is. So that's like similar mechanisms that all other social platforms also share with Facebook. In Germany, many newspapers have retrieved the solution to just like dissolve the commentary section, just because it was so much work to moderate day by day and at night. And so that seems to be like, I mean, a very radical solution, but also like one that we can, I guess, everyone in the room to a certain extent understand, because you cannot just have like people working day and night and just like shove off all the stuff that is inappropriate. How are you overseeing media in this state of Germany, and clearly also being an astute observer of media? What is your take on the subject matter?
Yeah, thank you, and also from my side, hello everyone, and thanks for inviting me. It's, of course, not an easy question to answer. First, I think, you know, as you said, I agree that we have this tremendous change of digital reality in a lot of different aspects, but at the same time, I'm not sure if that means that our traditional idea of having values and defending them also in a legal way doesn't work in the future. So that's why here I would say let's think about it a little bit. Or to say it in another way, Facebook has community standards. We have also community standards. We call it law. That's an interesting system of community standards, but it's well established. And of course, our work is to protect these values, protect by the law, meaning in media, mainly the protection of minors, the protection of human dignity, the protection of consumers, of pluralism, and at the same time, of course, the freedom of speech. And that's now the interesting point. Because, as you said, and this is also our experience when we started with our initiative about 2 years ago, we have had an exchange with different media companies, also public broadcasters in Germany, and asked them how they proceed with hate speech. And the result was either deleting or shutting down of the possibility to have a conversation and discussion online. Both of it, I think, is not a good signal for our open society, because the first or the second first is, of course, if newspapers, broadcasting stations, so to say, professional content companies have the feeling that they are not anymore able to handle discussions, and that's why not only shutting down their opportunity to discuss it online, but also to say special topics we don't bring at special moments. There was, for example, one person coming from a broadcasting station who said that they have the feeling that they are not able to report about problems like refugees or homosexuality on Friday afternoon, because there's no one who can handle the discussion. And this is, at the end, really a tremendous risk for an open society and freedom of speech, because if also the free media has the feeling that they're getting so much under pressure because of the hate in the internet, then of course I think we've got to intervene here. The second aspect is the question if deleting is the right answer, coming back to our own headline. And I think it is not only. That's why we are very hard working on an idea to say, beside the question of deleting, we've got also to task the different topics and to prosecute the people they are bringing hate into the internet. Why? Because of two reasons. The first is that's the general idea of law. So if you're violating law, there has to be a consequence. And second, and that's the more important thing, I think, is we've got to bring back into the society an awareness of the idea that, of course, the borderline of freedom of speech is respect to others, is respecting the life and the personal integrity of individuals as well as of groups. And that's why we are deeply convinced that it is really important to say, yes, we have got to find new techniques, we have got to find new mechanisms, we have got to find much better ways of cooperation in between different authorities, we've got to get faster, but nevertheless, the general idea to protect the core values of our society also by prosecuting these actions is really important if we would like to bring also the online again, under the control of the democratic idea that there we have a respectful exchange of opinions.
Before we go deeper into regulation, let's just for another minute or so discuss about, go to the conceptual level. Like Facebook for the longest time has said it's a platform, and thereby, so somewhat like, playing down the role of community. On the other hand, it is to connect people. That's what Mark Zuckerberg says all along. So the point here is, if it's about friendship, friendship is basically the only aspect of our human societal life I could think of that is not regulated by law. So we have actually, and that's why I mean it's conceptualized, there is no law about friendship. There's laws about getting married, there's laws about dying, there's how you get, how you have to be buried and all this, but there's no law about friendship. And actually, could that not be the problem why Facebook now is dealing with so many problems? Not because there's no law about friendship, so that would like exculpate you guys. I'm not saying that. I feel like the problem is that maybe on these platforms we have not been thinking about that you will be setting these standards for the first time in human history to say, hey, what does it mean to be a friend and how do you behave with a friend? Because that's basically, I believe, something that we have to discuss before we talk about law. So do you see that, would you agree that Facebook missed the point?
Well, I think at the core of your question lies the question, do we have a responsibility when it comes to regulating or defining rules and executing on them when it comes to the content on our platform? And we think the clear answer to this is yes. But, as you rightly stated, in the old world, we had a media law, we had telcos, the pipes that would just let the content run through, but they didn't have any control on that content. We had the content providers who provided and curated the content. And there were rules for these both types of companies within the media ecosystem. Now, social media is different. We are neither a content provider, nor are we a telco. We are something else. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't have any rules. So this is why we defined those rules. And by the way, we think ourselves that we shouldn't be in the position to make those decisions and to execute them ourselves. Not at all. But in the absence of rules, we are defining rules because it's important that we cannot allow all kinds of graphic violence, all kinds of incitement to hatred, hate speech in the most horrible ways. So we have defined these rules, but we are very open to discuss them and also to discuss possibilities to execute them in a better way. We are on a very good path towards more and more transparency. And I think we are going to see more, and we are happy to discuss future models of regulation with the legislators around the world. Mark Zuckerberg has been in Europe quite often these days, and I'm pretty sure he's coming back to discuss these very ideas because they lie at the core of what we think is important, of what societies think is important, and of what policymakers think is important. But when we are honest, nobody has the perfect solution yet. We don't have it. Regulators don't have it. Societies, I guess, don't have it yet. The academic world is searching, policymakers as well. So let's all sit at one table and discuss how we can do better, because we would all strive for an ecosystem online where hate is not dominant.
I wonder if we have the time, Rita and Tobias. I mean, the what you advocating is like a soft equilibrium between self-regulatory coming by good behavior and like regulatory like measures in case that good behavior doesn't kick in. But now we see societies that are highly divided and polarized. England, the United States. I mean, so the question is, it didn't really work, and that's not only or like exclusively Facebook's or Twitter's fault. It's just like by the metric of the technology, we now see a lot of polarization. So I wonder if we have enough time to do exactly what. What would be your ideas? You two.
I think, first of all, we've got to differentiate two different aspects of kind of discussion we are talking about here. The first is illegal content, meaning hate speech in an illegal sense, violation of law and so on. So this is an area where I've got to say very clearly, you know, we are in good cooperation also with Facebook in our projects, but to be honest, at the end, it's not that important what the opinion of Facebook is, and if Facebook thinks this is a conversation of friends, a violation of law is violation of law, and it's up to us to say as society, as prosecutors, that we are doing our duty and that we are taking care that a violation of law is sanctioned. And if we don't do so, then of course that would lead into an so to say, a very Darwinistic situation we have concerning illegal content. On the other side, we have the very big area of legal ways of communication. They can be unpolite, but to being unpolite is not illegal, and this is a question of freedom of speech. And therefore, I think we've got to cooperate, to work on media literacy, to develop an so to say, understanding of population, what they are doing. We've got to explain not only younger, but especially older generations what's happening there, and this is something we can do in cooperation. But here I really would like to make this very clear. I think in this first category, the illegal content, it is up to us as society to say what our needs are. If we still believe in protection of minors, protection of human dignity and so on, and if we do so, then we've got to be consequent in sanctions. And the most interesting experience we did in the last 18 or 24 months in a project that we've done also with the support of Facebook is it's possible. When we started, there was the idea, we are not sure if we can do anything because there's such a mass of aggression and hate speech in the internet. And so, of course, we were afraid, together with the state prosecutors, that we can't handle this thousands and thousands of cases. But our experience after 18 months is that's not a question of thousands and thousands of cases. It's a question of hundreds and hundreds. That's a lot of, but it is not something you can't get under control. You've got to be consequent, and you've got to have to know that this is nothing you can solve in 2 or 3 months. You will need 2 or 3 years for that. But this is our job and our duty, and if we do so, then we will see if we can, this one part or first part, the illegal content, get under control. And I strongly believe in that, because at the end, as I said, everything has changed, but the core values haven't. And it is up to us as society to protect them. A bigger issue from the volume is the area of unpolite or aggressive communication that is not illegal. And here, standards, of course, can help. But to make this very clear, for the first part, Facebook or Google or Twitter can have standards if they want, and that's fine. But at the end, that's not the important thing for us. For us, it's important if there's a violation of law. And I think we all have really to learn here, because also our own behavior 2 years ago was very, how to say, phlegmatic and saying, we can't do anything. And our experience out of our first actions we have taken in the last months is, yes, we can do so. And it's successful is the wrong word, but we are coming, we make success step by step. And we have had, I think, last week, the first judgment in Germany based on this initiative, where someone gets 8 months to jail for being aggressive out of this action of getting, sorry, I've got to add this sentence, and that's also important. You know, at the end, for this hate and violation, not Facebook or Twitter is responsible. They are responsible to support us, and they are responsible to help us to find people doing aggression and violating law. But it is at the end an individual that is setting up the hate post. And this individual has to have the feeling that there is a risk that at 6:30 in the morning, the ring bells and 2 policemen stands in front of your door and say, "Good morning, I would like to have your smartphone, your computer, your PlayStation, and you would join me for the next 2 hours." And this is what we did. We did last summer in all over North Rhine-Westphalia and also the other areas of Germany, an action together with the police. And it was very interesting to see that a lot of the people that we were acting against were acting with clear names. They're using their own names in the internet. It was not so difficult to find them because they just didn't have the understanding that what they were doing was illegal. And you can believe me that the, how to say, effect of education, to have this very polite 2 persons in uniform in the morning in the front of your door, is a good one.
So Rita, is your belief in the capabilities of law enforcement reinsured, or like do you believe in the sincerity of organizations and companies like Facebook? I mean, Facebook, after all, like Apple and Google, they subscribe to diversity, to like actually the whole company ideology is against like divisiveness. So, but yet still we sit here and discuss. What do you make out of the comments of your 2 co-panelists?
Oh, there's a lot to say. Maybe I would start reflecting to what Tobias said just a few minutes before about the community standards are being laws. And I think here we have a little problem because community standards are not laws. And I think this is one of the fundamental problems. Because when it comes to international human rights standards, they are laid down in clear legislation, and so they're reinforceable. And I sit in a committee in the United Nations where we review country performance every 2 years. So governments come in front of us, they tell us what they are doing to eliminate racial discrimination, we review it and we give an opinion. Now, this is because there is legislation, there are international standards, and there is a mechanism that would control it. If it comes to social media platforms, especially when they are self-regulatory, you have their own terms of service or reference or community standards, different names, but they set it up themselves, and then there is nobody to reinforce it by themselves, and that's a huge issue. And if you look into how hate speech is defined on YouTube, on Google, on Facebook and Twitter, it's completely different. The threshold of what constitutes hate speech is completely different in these platforms. So the users are in the blue. Because yes, when we sign up for these softwares, when we upgrade our softwares, you send us all the fine prints about what we are supposed to do, how we are supposed to respect the community standards and values. But of course, people have no capacity to read it, and then they don't understand it. And the problem is that they don't know how it is applied. So what constitutes hate speech on Twitter might not be hate speech on Facebook. So, and that's the problem, that there is not a central independent body that could make a decision. And so the discussion about regulation is often, so do we have regulation by the state, which is a complete control over what's going on the online surface, for example? Is it co-regulation, that the state set standards, but the platforms themselves also have their own enforcement mechanisms? Or is it self-regulation? Like they set up their own standards and they reinforce it. And this is why I think we, from the international community, come with an idea that let's think about independent mechanisms like media councils, who would have that role to look into these legislations, regulations, and then try to reinforce them so they are consistent and they are somehow harmonized. Because at the moment, we really don't know what's going on. And I have to tell you something which is, I understand, a bit controversial. Many times what is removed from social media platforms or other online surfaces as hate speech would not actually be hate speech in legal terms. Because we have to differentiate between incitement to genocide or racial violence, which is hate speech and has to be removed. There are hateful content which should go through a test so that we can define whether they are hate speech or not. And then there are the jokes, those comments that are really, they have no high, what's the opposite of tasteful? Tasteless? Is it an English word? No. I'm looking at the, huh? Distasteful? Thanks for the native speakers. So there are comments, and I get them. When I go online, I'm coming from a minority group, I get all the nasty comments. They are painful, but they would not constitute hate speech, so they should be left on the platforms. And so let us just picture a real life statement of political party leaders. So if we have a leader coming to the main square of a capital and spreading messages that are considered to be hateful by certain people in the audience, they would file a complaint. So the court, in an ideal situation, would look into the context of the country. What's going on? Is there a conflict? Is there ongoing structural discrimination? Is there unequal competition for resources? Is there censorship? What's going on in the country? Then a court would look at the speaker. Who is the speaker? What's the position of the speaker? What's the level of authority? What's the possible influence over the audience? Then it would look into the intention of the speaker. Was it just negligence? Was it ignorance? Was it distasteful jokes? Or was it an actual intention to kill part of the population? Then it would look into the magnitude of the speech. How many people were reached? Was it a single leaflet? Was it a public broadcasting agency? And then it would look into, let me look at my notes, the likelihood of harm. Like, was it really a probability that this would lead to action? So a court would be in a position to look at all these. Now, if it's if it's a comment online, if it's like, dirty gypsies, go back home. This is what I get sometimes. I'm partly Roma, and so I'm actually live in Senegal, but I'm Hungarian, if you get confused by my look and my name and all that. So I'm Hungarian, I live in Senegal, but I am partly Roma. And so it's multiple identities in the 21st century. So I get messages like, you dirty gypsy, go. Yeah, and I'm married into a very traditional Muslim family, so I get all, yeah. Yeah, so I get all the hate speech that you can imagine from every angle.
But
so,
the point you make is quite actually a good line for our next trailer, because it shows us where the connection is between the online and the offline world, because unfortunately it does not only stay online, but it spills over into the real world. So what your example from the market square, we have been, there has been prepared for us another trailer that actually exactly looks into that, what you were just talking about. Thank you very much for that. Tobias, it seems we need much more than two uniformed policemen at 6:30 in the morning to tackle these sort of problem. What do you make out of this scenario? Do you have any experience with like the topic that's discussed here, like the spread of hatred out of the online world into the real world, and how to combat that?
Absolutely. If you allow me, I just would like to inform you about one point that Rita said just before, and I forgot for a second that this is not the German media target, it's the global media forum, and not everyone is informed about our system. It's just important for me to say, and I'm sure you know it, that the European media regulators are written in the AVMS directive, that's the law for that, are independent. So also my authority is not a state authority, it is an independent authority because media protection, or the authorities of media in Germany as well as in the most other European countries, are independent from the state, and that's important because we have got to respect all the aspects that you have had in your catalog when we take a look on it. This one thing, I know that this is not all over the world like this, but just to make this clear, and when I say that I'm sure that our, as a fun word, community standards, I call it the law, are something that we can fulfill. Of course, that's a very German perspective, and that's. But this is my experience, and also an European experience. Yes. Of course, there is a connex in between the question how aggressive is communication in the population. And again, I come back to this point, we've got to discuss, if we do it serious, 2 different points. The first is, how can we take care that the illegal hate speech, the aggressivity against races, colors, religions, and so on is something that, as far as it is illegal, is getting under control. And this is a question at the end. Is it as simple as it is? At the end, 2 policemen stand in front of the door. Maybe there are a lot of doors. But this is the story, and we've got to start at one point. Just to say we don't know how to do is not an answer. So our answer is that we do it step by step, and maybe, of course, we can't change the world coming from North Rhine-Westphalia, but this is my responsibility, and here we start with it. And as we know, for example, we are in close exchange with our colleagues in Switzerland, in Austria, in France, in most of the German states, that they try to get implemented similar projects for this area. And I really believe it is important that population, especially parts of population that have a tendency to choose, for example, parties like the AfD, learn that beside the idea of freedom of speech, there is an absolute border they have got to respect, and we've got to bring this back into mind. And there is no other way than fulfilling the law. On the other side, and this is something that we've got to learn not only on the AfD case, but on this whole area, and that's a challenge for society and politicians, that the whole kind of political communication will change tremendously. So take a not so dramatic example out of we have had the European election, and just before there was this video coming from Rizzo, a kind of political communication. This was not hate speech, nothing of that, but it shows also that the communication of political ideas, aspects, and opinion is going on other ways than the ways that our society has learned in the past. And therefore, we've got to develop answers. And first of all, we've got to face it that it is like it is. And that, of course, and there I think we agree totally that we won't find the answers for this problem in the old world. Because this kind of communication we have now, and it's fantastic, professionally used, unfortunately, by parties like the AfD, is something that exists. And if we have on the other side, and I think there we also agree, this core idea of freedom of speech in democracy, then of course there will be a bigger pressure on our democratic understanding, because now everyone, also from the political extremes, in the first step, are allowed to say their opinion, as long as they are on the ground of constitution. And this is something that we also have got to learn. And that's not an easy one.
But I was wondering, when we watched the clip, why does Facebook not take down the AfD side on the ground of that they deny a code of conduct? It's not just that they have a shitty one, or and they have none. So it's just like, could you not just say, listen, that's just something you need because all the other parties also have that, and we make you guys do that?
Yeah, very interesting question, and let me answer that in a second. Please allow me to comment on that video and on that study that you featured in the video. So if I remember it correctly, that study has been widely featured by the New York Times last year. And the study itself has raised very important topics, but it has been largely criticized in the academic and in the research community because it hasn't even undergone a scientific peer review process. So this doesn't mean that this isn't possible, but I would at least question that the study itself proves a causal link between that activity on the AFD sides and the violence on the ground. It's very possible, but it's not proven. We have taken a very close look at the study, as you might imagine, because when we hear such a thing, we are worried as well. So we have talked about it with many experts, and we talk with experts in Germany who focus on polarization, on racism, on many of these topics. So we take this very seriously. We would just be cautious to take this as a fact. Now, when it comes to the question, why don't we just take down the AFD side?
Not just down, but like just saying, okay, we all need like code of conduct. Why do you not have any code of conduct?
We do. We have our community standards and we enforce them. So the AFD is an allowed legal party that takes part in democratic elections in Germany. And it's not on us, on a private company, to decide to take this legal party down. I may not like them, you may not like them, that's not on us. We are a private company and we have to follow the law. And as long as the German Federal Constitutional Court doesn't forbid that party, we won't take it down. So what we do is we define our community standards and we execute those standards, also on the page of the AfD, by the way. And of course, we follow the law. So if on that page there's incitement to hatred, there's insult, there's defamation, we act on it and we remove it in Germany, of course. And then there's a second topic that I would like to touch upon, because you especially, Tobias, has talked about criminal prosecution in these cases. So we have a team that works very closely with law enforcement. So we try to cooperate whenever possible and help them to prosecute people who have committed crimes on our platforms. But this doesn't mean that we can give out any kind of data to a law enforcement body just like this. So we have to look, is that a competent body? Is there a legal basis for them to ask this data set from us? What kind of data do they need? Is there actually really a threat of a crime in this case? Or is it just some kind of government in the world that doesn't like a certain activist and asks us to know everything about that activist? So this is not how it works. It's not as easy as that. So we are trying to cooperate, but we follow rules. And those rules, by the way, the community standards, they are very much linked to international human rights standards. So, for example, we work very closely also with UN experts. I've been in workshops with the UN Special Rapporteur on freedom of expression, for example. So he knows our standards. We are looking at those with experts all around the world. He has, by the way, also visited one of our content moderation centers in Germany. So he has had the possibility to talk to those content moderators without their bosses being in the room. So this is our way in which we are trying to be transparent and also to let the international, really expert community in and to help them make our job better.
I would like at this point to open the debate to you guys, to the people here in the room. We have 15 more minutes, so if we are disciplined, we make 3 questions. So number 1, I saw here. I'm the moderator. So number 2, do we have somebody on the other side too? Entschuldigen Sie? Yeah. Do you have somebody else? A third one? Okay, then we just take those 2. Looks good.
Microphone?
Oh, yeah. Or I can speak louder. Yeah, and also one question.
Hello, nice to meet you all. Thank you for this discussion. My name is Michael Gostkiewicz from the Virtual Poland online broadcaster, and I have questions to both of the ladies present in the room. First, to Rita, do you really think that actually we as humanity, united within the United Nations framework, can actually agree on any hate speech standards? Because what is considered hate speech in the US might not be considered, or will probably never be considered hate speech in Southeast Asia, and vice versa. And the question to Facebook is, you mentioned that you are trying to implement your community standards as the internal company way of executing at least some control over what is published within the space of Facebook. But my question is, who controls you then? Because Facebook has a difficult task of agreeing with about 190 countries in the world and abide the law of those 190 countries, where everywhere law is different. So is there any way to actually execute any control over your inside community Facebook standards to which any international countries community can agree on? Thank you.
Thank you. Who wants to start?
Take all of them, or?
No, it's two questions, one for you and one for you. So shoot.
No, it's fine.
Who wants to start of you two?
Okay, so I'll start. Thank you very much. This is a very interesting question. So if we set the standards and we execute them, who then controls us? Yeah, very good question. So in Germany, we have the rule of law, and we are very happy about that fact, and it's courts. So at the moment, you see, or we are facing quite an amount of law proceedings against Facebook from individual users who sue us because we have removed their comments or their content, and they think that was not right. We didn't take the right decision, so we removed something that was actually legal. And then a court looks at it, and if we did it wrong, the court says, okay, Facebook, you did it wrong, you have to reinstate that comment. And within these proceedings, German courts have come to the conclusion more and more, there are many different legal proceedings, so they're not all in one direction, but you can see that the direction goes into the opinion that our standards are in fact transparent, they're not surprising, and they're not so far away from the German law, so they're not so negative for our users. So we do have the right to execute them if we do that right, if we do that correctly. Now, if we're honest, every now and then we're making mistakes and we're not doing it correctly. So there might be cases where we took a wrong decision, and then it's perfectly okay and perfectly all right for a German court to say, you please reinstate that comment, and then we follow that rule, that decision, of course, because it's a German court, and if that court says you have to reinstate the comment, we do. Sometimes we disagree and we might like walk the hierarchy of courts up, but that's our normal legal right. And we think that's absolutely the system that should be in place in other regions around the world as well. Now, in a perfect world, like I studied international and human rights law as well, it would be great to have some kind of European Court of Human Rights for the world, but let's be honest, it doesn't exist. Would be great, it doesn't. It's not. In Europe, it does exist, and it's good, but it doesn't exist like for the world. And if the UN created rules and had a certain kind of committee that would take us in front of the committee and tell us what to do, I'm sure we would be happy to enter into a discussion with them. But at the moment, we are only starting, and let's see how it goes.
Thank you. I would reflect quickly on what you said before I go to the question. I think we need to discover these new possible relationships between the United Nations and businesses. And you know, there is this guidelines on business and human rights, because the idea is that human rights treaties apply to the countries who ratify them. So there is a state-UN relationship. But the new discussion is about how it should be established between the businesses and the United Nations. And so there is this, maybe you know, the forum in Geneva on business and human rights, which is now a large thing of thousands of people gathered together. And I think this this is the future, to look into how we can skip the state, because they don't necessarily have to be part of this triangle, but like how human rights standards should bind businesses, and then how it goes vice versa with the relationship. So I think that's something that could be more explored in the future. Back to your question, you're very right. Like, Americans are obsessed with the First Amendment and the freedom about, like, you see what to speak whatever. And then, of course, in Germany, because of the history, it's much more regulated, although we can see that sometimes there are challenges as well. I don't think we can come to like one legally binding definition, but there are guidelines, and the Rabat Plan of Action on Advocacy against national, racial, and religious hatred, for example, came up with this 6 threshold test on what constitutes hate speech. And so the Rabat Plan of Action is something we use for like any partner that we talk to and any government to be used. And if the moderator allows me, I would add one comment which maybe takes us out a little bit of the very narrow, I mean, it's a broad, but I mean from the very focus of the discussion. And if I might just trigger a little bit of thinking among us about what is our responsibility to deal with hate speech. Because I come from this that the populists will always be there. The far-right groups will be there. Extremist politicians will be there because they have an agenda. They are well organized. They know what to do. They have the money. They are structured. And they definitely have a strategy. So they will be there. But for me, we should not always talk about them, what they do, because they have been existing, they will be existing. For me, the bigger question is what we do about it, like each of us in this room. And so I have taken up this personal mission to travel and try to encourage people to get into these painful discussions on social media. If you see a hateful comment, I believe we need to respond. And we don't need to respond to convince the other person or a bot, because we never know, about our sense of how you call it, justice, or our sense or our values. But we need to do it so we show the others who are like-minded that they are not alone. So when I see a hateful comment, I put my own, which would disagree with the person or the bot, I don't know, but I will leave it there because I want the next person who comes and thinks like me to see that there are people who are like me. So these far-rightists, the extremists, cannot dominate the platforms. Because what they do, that they strategically attack a post or any site, and they would leave hundreds of comments. And it happens to me. I used to be a special reporter. On minorities in the UN, I got hundreds and hundreds of hate messages. And there were hundreds and hundreds of private messages in my inbox about concerned people. But my public wall was flooded by anonymous people spreading hatred. And it made me sad because the number was not reflecting the reality. So if you came to my own website, you could see all these really nasty comments about like black people and whatever. If you came to my inbox, which you couldn't do because it's private, you could see how people are just disgusted and worried and like, oh my God, I'm sorry, this is terrible, what can we do? So I'm trying to like spread this message to all of us that I know it's annoying, it's consuming, it's draining, but I think we need to get our comments out. If you see a hateful conversation, a flood of terrible comments, many of us close the laptops, we shake our head, some of us get a glass of wine, we just pull out of this word, we feel like this is falling apart, we don't want to be part of it, we don't even want to read this thing, it's too hurtful. But this is how we help the hate mongers. Because by putting our comments, building a critical mass, building a community of resistant people who show that we love peace, we want diversity, we want friendship among people, regardless the background, then I think we can frighten and we can somehow get rid of these far-rightists. But if we let them dominate the platforms, we lose this battle.
We have another question here. We have can I use your mic for that? There you go.
Thank you. I'm Martin Rodriguez from Guatemala, from NOMA, that is an investigative media, and we are about to start an alliance with Facebook for memberships from the readers so they can give us money through the platform. But I wanted to ask 2 questions. The first one was, if one as a single user in Facebook gets like warnings that is publishing hate speech, after 2 or 3 warnings, your user is out. So I don't know why if the user can't be out after some warnings. And then I wonder whether you were at the keynote speech from Mr. Lanier, and he was talking about mediators of individual data, and as a what I think a very coherent alternative for hate speech dominating the platforms. I would like to know, the 3 of you, what do you think about this idea, and whether you think it's possible in the near future?
So that also may be then our concluding round for each of you. Who wants to start? Yeah, whosoever wants. Just you, please.
So if you'll allow me, I would just like to say that I couldn't agree more with what Rita said before. And it reflects a little bit what we think we as Facebook, apart from having rules and executing them, could do. Because we offer a tool to build communities around the world. You may think that's stupid, but it works very well. And what we would like to see is a community of the now kind of silent majority of the democratic thinking people around the world. Let's just all leave one little comment, and that would change a hell of a lot. So about this idea of MIDs, he called them, that would define their own rules and execute them. Yes, that's a very interesting idea. I thought so as well. And actually in Germany, we are part of, it's a very interesting, Tobias Schmid might be better in explaining it, system of a co-regulated, self-regulation system. So for example, we are member of a self-regulatory body, FSM it's called. They have a lot of expertise in youth protection and criminal law and hate speech, and we are working very closely together with them, and also together with other tech companies, with telco companies. We are also working, as Tobias said, with him and his project when it comes to law enforcement. So that's not exactly the same, but we are already trying together, like-minded companies, also regulators. We are trying to build little systems to work on particular problems that we can't face alone. So I think that's a very good idea.
I think, first of all, I also would like to agree, and I think that's one of the key messages also out of this discussion here, that, of course, this new world is, it's absolutely fascinating. It's a fantastic opportunity for democratic society, and it's just up to us to use it. At the same time, of course, we've got to be self-confident in protecting our ideas, our values, and I think we can do so, and we can support the good things, as you said. And I think this is, beside all the legal discussions and regulatory discussions, it's one of the most important points. And concerning this idea, I haven't heard the speech. I can only say that on the one hand, of course, it is always a good idea to say, let's find solutions together. As a regulator, it would be not so surprising that at the end, I strongly believe that there has got to be one institution, if self-regulatory ideas or mechanisms also in a technical way doesn't work, to intervene, just in case. If it works by itself or by its own, that's fine. We have got to see that also this won't be the answer on the general development of society and discussion. There the answer is more than, like Rita said, the question if the other part of the society, and I'm sure it's the bigger one, also takes the time that all the aggressive haters take to make clear that at the end the main part of population still believes in a trustful and free and freeful cooperative style of living together.
I forgot to answer your first question. Can I answer that very quickly, because it's not polite otherwise? Of course we do execute our rules also on the AfD page. If a user on that page violates our standards, we take that content down, and we also remove the profile of that user if he repeatedly violates the standards. We don't make any exceptions for that.
No comment? No. Oh, cool. I mean, that means we are in time, but I'm sure we all would have loved to hear also like a closing remark of you, Rita. And If not, then, I mean, please, yeah.
No, just repeat to get into action. Like, let's leave this room with a renewed inspiration to fight hatred together. That's
Awesome.
all.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you, Marie. Thank you, Tobias. Thank you to all of you for joining in. Have a great conference and goodbye.